The hum of the airplane's engines was a soft lullaby, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, Jasmine allowed herself to relax into her seat, her exhausted body craving the quiet refuge of sleep. She glanced down at her baby, Jamal, nestled in her arms, his small body cradled against her chest as he, too, drifted into a peaceful nap. Jasmine's life had been a constant whirlwind of work and motherhood, balancing the responsibilities of a single mother with the stress of her low-wage job. It was hard, and the exhaustion that clung to her bones was the kind of tired that sleep alone couldn't fix. She hadn't had a moment of true peace in months, and even now, as the plane soared above the clouds, it felt like she was too burdened to rest. The child in her arms stirred, and her eyelids grew heavy as the rhythmic sway of the plane lulled her into a daze. She tried to stay awake, but soon enough, the weight of her exhaustion overcame her, and her head tilted forward without warning. It happened so quickly before she could correct herself, her head landed softly on the shoulder of the person sitting next to her. She blinked, groggy and surprised, realizing that her cheek was now resting against the crisp, cool fabric of a suit jacket. The man beside her had not reacted, though the brief shift of his posture suggested he had noticed. His presence was immediately distinct: the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the smooth, well-groomed look that screamed success. He was clearly a man who carried the weight of corporate power in a way Jasmine could only dream of. For a moment, she froze, mortified. She had no intention of disturbing anyone, much less a man who likely occupied a world so far removed from hers. She pulled away, embarrassed, her heart racing as she mumbled an apology. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice hushed but frantic. "I didn't mean to." "It's all right," the man interrupted, his tone calm, reassuring. "You don't have to apologize." He shifted in his seat slightly, and Jasmine was startled to see the warmth in his gaze. There was something unassuming in the way he looked at her, like the world of suits and meetings, of million-dollar deals and corporate responsibility, didn't matter in this moment. He smiled gently, and despite the difference in their appearances, his suit sharp, her well-worn clothes and hair pulled back into a messy bun, there was a kind of mutual understanding that passed between them. It was as if, in that brief exchange, the distinctions between them faded away. Jasmine hesitated, unsure whether to return to her seat or try to adjust herself to continue the awkward balancing act of keeping Jamal comfortable without disturbing the well-dressed man beside her. But before she could decide, she felt his gaze on her, not with judgment, but with empathy. "It's been a long day for you, hasn't it?" he said quietly, his words neither prying nor patronizing, just an observation made with genuine care. His voice was deep but soft, almost soothing. Jasmine looked at him for a long moment, surprised by his perceptiveness. It wasn't often that people took the time to see her beyond the surface, especially in a world where she was used to being invisible, a woman of color, struggling to make ends meet. She nodded slowly, feeling an unexpected wave of gratitude. "Yeah," she said, her voice catching slightly as she thought of the long hours spent working, the endless responsibilities, and the emotional weight she carried as a single mother. "It has been." They both sat in silence for a few seconds, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet that stretched out between them, filled with an unspoken connection. There was something about the way he hadn't pulled away or made her feel like an inconvenience that touched her deeply. She wasn't sure what it was, but in this fleeting moment, as the plane hummed on and the night sky outside darkened, Jasmine felt a warmth she hadn't expected. She felt seen. And for the first time in a long time, the weight of her world felt just a little bit lighter. Slowly, Jasmine allowed herself to settle once again, her head resting on the man's shoulder, not as an intrusion, but as a small, unspoken agreement between two strangers sharing a moment of rest. The flight continued on, the city lights below flickering like stars, and for those precious minutes, Jasmine allowed herself to forget about the bills that needed to be paid, the laundry piling up, and the tiredness that had been gnawing at her. She allowed herself to breathe. The man, despite his high-powered life, had given her something simple but rare, a moment of quiet, unjudged peace. She felt her shoulders relax for the first time in ages, her breath deepening. It was only a brief interlude, this unexpected connection, but in that space between their two worlds, Jasmine felt a comfort she hadn't known she was missing. When she woke a short while later, she found her head still resting gently against his shoulder, and this time, she didn't feel the need to apologize. It wasn't a mistake. It was a shared moment of human kindness, unexpected and warm, where two very different lives had briefly intertwined, and for a little while, the distance between them didn't matter. The hum of the airplane's engines was a soft backdrop to the stillness that enveloped the CEO as he sat in his first-class seat, his eyes drifting across the cabin, scanning the faces of the passengers. Most were absorbed in their own worlds, their minds preoccupied with business, technology, or whatever else filled the lives of those who could afford the luxury of such travel. Yet, his gaze was drawn to one woman in particular, a young mother, her face soft in sleep, her head resting gently against the window, her baby cradled in her arms, peacefully unaware of the world around him. There was something serene about the sight, something that stirred a deep, unfamiliar ache in the CEO's chest. He had built his empire from the ground up, clawing his way through a world of competition, ambition, and ruthless decision-making. He had everything anyone could want: money, power, respect, and yet, as he watched the mother's protective hold on her child, he felt an emptiness settle within him, a longing he couldn't quite place. He shifted in his seat, his eyes never leaving the small family in the row across from him, the mother's chest rising and falling with each breath, the child's small fingers curled around the fabric of her blouse. The image was simple, unremarkable to most, but to him, it was profound. He had spent so much of his life focused on success, on achievements that were measured in profits and market shares, in mergers and acquisitions. But now, in the quiet of this moment, he found himself questioning the cost of it all. When had his life become so devoid of tenderness? When had he stopped seeing the beauty in the small, simple moments, like the mother's hand gently smoothing the baby's hair, or the child's peaceful face, untouched by the burdens of the world? The CEO had grown up in a world of hardship, of difficult choices and struggles that had shaped him into the man he had become. His parents had worked tirelessly to provide for him, but there had never been enough time, enough money, enough love. He had learned early that the only way to survive was to keep moving forward, to outpace the hardships, to push himself further than anyone else. It had worked. He had become the man people turned to for advice, the man whose every word carried weight. He was the CEO now, a title that demanded respect, that made him untouchable in many ways. But watching the mother and child, he felt a crack in the armor he had spent years perfecting. There was a vulnerability in their bond, a quiet strength in the way the mother cared for her child, that seemed to call out to something deep within him, something he had long buried beneath layers of success and ambition. He hadn't known what it was like to be truly loved like that, to experience the kind of unconditional devotion that passed between a mother and her child. His own parents had loved him in their own way, but it had always been wrapped in the expectations of what he could achieve, the future he was supposed to build, the success he was supposed to attain. Love had been a transaction, something to be earned, not given freely. And now, as he sat here, his thoughts racing, he realized how much he had missed the intimacy of true connection, the quiet moments of joy that didn't require accolades or recognition, the kind of love that didn't need to be proven to the world. The baby stirred slightly, a soft whimper escaping its lips, and the mother immediately responded, adjusting her hold with a tenderness that made the CEO's throat tighten. He was taken aback by the sharp pang of longing that followed, longing for something he didn't know how to find. His entire life had been spent building walls around himself, walls that had kept him safe from vulnerability, but also from the kind of intimacy that could fill the emptiness he now felt. He shifted again in his seat, discomfort settling over him. This was absurd. What was he even doing? He was a successful businessman, a leader in his field, not someone who had time to dwell on emotions or daydream about things he could never have. But as the mother continued to sleep, her child nestled in her arms, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this fleeting, chance encounter was somehow significant. He had spent years building a life that looked perfect on paper, but now, looking at the mother and her child, he couldn't help but feel that it was incomplete. Was this how it was supposed to be? Was this what he had been missing all along? The flight attendants made their way down the aisle, serving drinks, but the CEO remained fixed on the family, his thoughts a tangled mess of confusion and desire. He had never been good at understanding his own emotions, had never allowed himself the luxury of vulnerability, but there was something about this woman, this child, that stirred him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the simplicity of their love, the purity of the bond that existed between them, that made him question his own choices. Maybe it was the realization that, despite all his achievements, he had missed out on something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in dollars or stock options. When the plane touched down, the CEO felt a sense of reluctance, a deep sorrow for the end of this brief moment in time, one that had caused him to look inward, to reassess everything he had thought he wanted. As he walked off the plane, he found himself wondering if this encounter so random, so fleeting had somehow changed him, if it had shown him a path he hadn't realized he was longing for. Would it lead him to something more meaningful? He didn't know, but as he glanced back toward the gate, the image of the mother holding her child stayed with him, a reminder that life, perhaps, wasn't just about what you built, but what you loved. The soft hum of the airplane's engines and the quiet murmur of passengers blended into the background as Emma stirred from a light, restless sleep. She blinked, her mind slowly rising from the haze of slumber, only to realize that her head was nestled against something warm. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. The plush armrest of her seat was absent, instead, her cheek rested gently on the shoulder of the man sitting beside her. Disoriented, she straightened up quickly, her face flushed with embarrassment. But as her gaze landed on the familiar, yet unexpected, figure of the CEO sitting next to her, a feeling of calm, almost surreal, washed over her. She hadn't noticed him there before, not with the overwhelming bustle of the airport or the distraction of the long flight. His sharp suit, the confident demeanor, he was a man whose presence often demanded respect, and yet, here he was, sitting quietly beside her in a moment of vulnerability. Her confusion deepened as she tried to recall how they had ended up like this. She had flown alone, a single mother on a rare, much-needed trip, a break from the exhausting routine of family, work, and responsibilities. But she didn't remember sitting down next to him, and she certainly didn't remember leaning on him. The warmth of his shoulder lingered as she slowly pulled away, glancing around at the other passengers, all of whom seemed absorbed in their own worlds. She hadn't intended to fall asleep. In fact, she had planned on reading, perhaps watching something to pass the time, but exhaustion from the weight of the past few months had claimed her. The sudden realization that she had fallen asleep on a stranger, no, not a stranger, but the CEO of a company she had once admired, a man whose decisions affected the lives of countless others, felt absurd. Yet, there was something different about him. As her mind cleared, she noticed his expression, kind, soft, as if he hadn't even thought to shift away from her as she slept. He was a man of power, someone who could command rooms full of people, yet here, he sat quietly, giving her the space to rest. The subtle warmth in his gaze, the small flicker of understanding, caught her off guard. She found herself hesitating, unsure of what to say. She had never been one to be caught in such an intimate, unguarded position. It was a reminder, she thought, of how little space she had allowed herself to relax in the past few years. Her life had been a constant juggling act between her duties as a mother and the demands of her work, always too tired, too stretched thin, too responsible. There was little time for rest, little room for the simple comforts of life. So, she had learned to keep her walls up, to hold herself together no matter the cost. Yet, in that quiet moment, as she slowly sat up, she realized that something had shifted. The silence between them hung in the air, neither of them rushing to break it. It was strange, this vulnerability that had surfaced unexpectedly, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt almost human. As her eyes met his, the CEO's gaze softened even further, his lips curling into a small, reassuring smile. "I didn't want to wake you," he said, his voice gentle, the words almost hesitant, as if he were aware of the delicate nature of the moment. "You looked like you needed the rest." His voice was not the commanding tone she expected, not the authoritative edge she had imagined in countless boardrooms or news reports. Instead, it was warm, understanding, and oddly real. Emma blinked, her surprise evident, but the words he spoke settled into her chest with a surprising weight. In that simple acknowledgement of her need for rest, of her humanness, the world seemed to momentarily shift. It was as if the rigid divide between her life as a mother, struggling to balance everything, and the world of corporate power had momentarily dissolved. There was no pretense between them, no facade of status or expectations. Just two people, in a quiet space, sharing an unspoken understanding. She sat for a moment, processing the unexpected kindness, wondering how she had ended up in this simple yet profound exchange with someone so far removed from her everyday life. The CEO, who had once been a figure of authority and distance, now felt approachable, almost ordinary, and in that realization, Emma felt a strange sense of connection. The walls she had built for years, trying to protect herself from the relentless demands of her life, suddenly seemed fragile, unnecessary. She found herself laughing softly, a quiet, almost incredulous sound. "I guess I must have really needed the sleep," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Her voice was unguarded, lighter than it had been in ages, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like herself, unfiltered and free from the weight of responsibility. The CEO chuckled in return, a brief, shared moment of laughter between them. "I don't think I've ever seen someone so at peace during a flight," he replied, his smile genuine, the moment somehow grounding. It wasn't the conversation she had expected, nor the kind of encounter she had imagined would take place with such a powerful man. Yet, as the minutes passed, a quiet recognition began to settle in. It wasn't the power or position that made him different. It was the kindness in his eyes, the simple decision to let her rest without interruption, that made this moment stand out. It was an awakening for her, not just to the possibility of unexpected human connections, but to the realization that sometimes, it's the smallest moments, the brief exchanges, the quiet gestures that can carry the deepest weight. As the plane continued its journey, Emma sat back in her seat, no longer feeling the usual weight of responsibility. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to simply be present, open, and awake. The cafe was quiet, the low hum of conversations and clinking coffee cups filling the air as the mother sat nervously across from the CEO. Her fingers twisted around the handle of her cup, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. She had been invited here under the pretense of a casual meeting, a simple discussion about potential opportunities, but nothing about this felt ordinary. The CEO, a man known for his powerful presence and meticulous approach to business, was calm, his eyes focused as he studied her, almost as if he were carefully weighing each word before speaking. She had no idea why he was interested in her. She was just a single mother, working long hours to provide for her children, struggling to make ends meet in a world that often felt indifferent to her efforts. She had never imagined she'd sit in the same room as someone like him, let alone receive an invitation to meet. But here she was, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind running wild with thoughts that made her feel both hopeful and uncertain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, the CEO leaned forward slightly, his voice steady yet filled with a quiet intensity. "I've been following your career for some time now," he said, his words catching her off guard. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "He's been following my career?" She had never considered that someone at his level would even know her name, let alone pay attention to the hard-fought steps she had taken to build a life for herself and her children. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. He continued, undeterred, his eyes never leaving hers. "I admire your tenacity, your drive, and your ability to overcome challenges that most people would crumble under. You've built something incredible from nothing, and that's something I respect more than you know." His words were a revelation, lifting her up in a way she hadn't realized she needed. They weren't just empty compliments. They were a recognition of her struggle, of everything she had worked for, and they made her heart swell with pride in a way that felt almost foreign. She had spent so many years doubting herself, questioning whether her efforts were enough. But here, across the table, was someone who saw her, who understood her drive and resilience in a way no one else ever had. But before she could fully process his praise, the CEO's voice shifted, becoming even more deliberate. "This isn't just a meeting for pleasantries. I have a business opportunity for you, one that could change your life." The words hit her like a wave, leaving her breathless. Her pulse quickened, her mind spinning. A business opportunity? She tried to focus, to steady her breathing, but it was as if the world around her had momentarily stopped. She hadn't come here expecting anything like this, nothing that could alter the course of her life. But his presence, his words, seemed to carry a weight she couldn't ignore. Was this a dream? She had always imagined moments like this, the ones where everything fell into place, but she had never believed they could happen to someone like her. She had always thought that success was reserved for those born into privilege, those with the right connections. And yet, here she was, listening to someone whose life was defined by influence and power, offering her a chance that could completely change her world. "I'm offering you the opportunity to work with me on a project," the CEO continued, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I believe in your potential, and I know that you can do more than just survive, you can thrive. I want you to be part of something bigger, to help shape the future of this company. Your experience, your perspective, it's invaluable. You've proven time and again that you can overcome any obstacle, and I believe you're ready for the next step." The room seemed to spin around her, and for a moment, she wondered if she might faint from the overwhelming emotions flooding her senses. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a lifeline. She had fought for everything she had, sacrificed so much to get by, but this was different. This was a chance to create something lasting, something that could secure a future for her children, for herself. She had always dreamed of a better life, of opportunities that would take her beyond the limitations of her circumstances. And now, the possibility of that dream standing before her felt too surreal to grasp. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing thoughts. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. This is so much more than I ever imagined." The CEO smiled, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "I know it's a lot to process, but I have no doubt that you're the right person for this. You've already shown what you're capable of. Now, it's time to step into a new chapter." His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, offering a comfort she had never expected to find in a meeting like this. She could feel the weight of the moment, the magnitude of the opportunity settling into her chest, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything she had worked for wasn't in vain. Maybe she was more than just a mother struggling to survive, she was a force to be reckoned with, and this was her chance to prove it. As the CEO continued to speak, laying out the details of the opportunity, she listened intently, her heart slowly filling with hope and excitement. The world had just shifted, and she wasn't sure if it was real, but in her gut, she knew that her life was about to change forever. The words hung in the air, thick with an unimaginable weight, as the CEO's offer settled into the quiet of the room. The janitor, standing before him, could scarcely process what she had just heard. A partnership in a business venture, an opportunity that could grant her the financial independence she had never dared to dream of. How could this be? The thought seemed too surreal, too foreign to comprehend, and for a moment, she simply stood there, her heart racing in her chest as disbelief swept over her like a sudden storm. She had spent years working in the shadows, invisible to the world, cleaning up after the high-powered, polished figures who ran the businesses, the companies, the industries that shaped the world around her. She had never once considered that she, too, might be offered a seat at that table, let alone one that could change the entire course of her life. Her mind whirled with conflicting thoughts, as if each possibility, each future was trying to push its way forward, but none of them could take hold. She thought of her child, the little one she had worked so hard to protect, to nurture, to provide for. The sacrifices she had made to ensure a better life for them, those long nights spent cleaning, the exhaustion she'd hidden behind a smile, the hopes she carried for a future that seemed so far out of reach. Could this really be the moment that changed everything? The joy she felt was overwhelming, but it was tinged with uncertainty. She could hardly wrap her mind around the offer. She had known the ache of struggle, the weight of uncertainty that came with each paycheck, the feeling that no matter how hard she worked, she was always just one step away from falling behind. To think that she could stand on her own, without the constant worry, without the strain of trying to make ends meet, was a thought so foreign that it almost felt like a dream. Yet, in her chest, she felt something stir, something deeper than the joy of financial stability. It was a sense of responsibility, a profound awareness that this offer wasn't just about her. It was about her child, about the future she could now give them. The idea of being able to provide for them in a way she never had before, of offering them choices, opportunities, a life free from the constraints that had shaped her own, was a gift she had only dared to imagine. But the weight of that responsibility was heavy. She wasn't just considering her own future, she was thinking of her child's, their future, and the life they could lead together. The enormity of it all pressed down on her, and for a moment, she felt lost. Could she handle it? Could she step into a world so foreign, so far removed from the life she knew? Could she, a woman who had spent years as an invisible figure, cleaning up after those who thought themselves untouchable, truly become a partner in something that held the potential to change everything? The thought both terrified and thrilled her. She looked at the CEO, whose face was unreadable, waiting for her response. But she couldn't speak. The words caught in her throat, tangled with the flood of emotions rushing through her. She had spent so long being told what she was worth, being relegated to the background, that it was hard to even imagine a world where she wasn't the one who was overlooked. And yet, here was this offer, this moment that could define everything she had ever hoped for. It felt like a dream, like she had been transported to a world where the impossible was suddenly within reach. But still, there was hesitation, a deep-rooted fear of failure, a fear of stepping into unknown territory and losing everything she had worked so hard for. She had known hardship her entire life, and the thought of that hardship returning, of failing her child, of not living up to the weight of this offer was almost too much to bear. What if she couldn't do it? What if she wasn't cut out for this world of business, of power, of risk? The self-doubt crept in, gnawing at her confidence, and for a moment, she wondered if she should decline, if she should return to the quiet, safe life she had always known. But the pull of her child's future, the possibility of offering them something better, something that wasn't defined by struggle, was too strong to ignore. The decision wasn't just about her, it was about them, and in that moment, she realized that the weight of this offer wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. As the CEO waited, his gaze steady, she took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment sink in. This was her chance not just for herself, but for her child, for a future that she could shape on her own terms. And as the words finally left her lips, quiet but firm, she realized that the decision was not just about what she could gain, but about what she could give. Yes, she said, and for the first time in years, she felt a surge of hope, a power of the realization that she could now forge her own path, no longer defined by her circumstances, but by the future she was now choosing to build. The offer was beyond anything she had ever imagined, a life-altering opportunity that seemed to have arrived out of nowhere, as if the universe had suddenly smiled upon her. The mother, who had spent years juggling the responsibilities of raising her child, managing a household, and working long hours to make ends meet, sat across from the CEO, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed by the words that had just been spoken. The CEO had recognized something in her, something she hadn't even seen in herself, and had extended a hand, offering her a position that promised financial stability, personal growth, and the kind of future she had only ever dreamed of. Yet, as the CEO spoke with genuine enthusiasm, the mother couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that gnawed at her. This wasn't supposed to happen to people like her. She wasn't supposed to be the one receiving such an offer. Her mind raced with insecurities, and a cloud of uncertainty settled over her. She looked down at her hands, worn from years of hard work, and felt a pang of self-doubt that threatened to swallow her. Am I ready for this? She thought. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? The weight of the decision was suffocating. To leave behind the only life she knew, to step into a world of high expectations and unfamiliar challenges, was terrifying. She had spent so many years being defined by her role as a mother and caretaker, never imagining herself in a corporate environment, let alone thriving in it. And then there were the thoughts of her child, her first priority, her constant worry. Could she balance this new opportunity with being the mother she wanted to be? Would the demands of a new job pull her away from the very thing that had always defined her? Her heart swelled with love for her child, and yet, she felt torn between the dreams she had for them and the fear that she would sacrifice too much of herself in pursuit of them. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. She wanted to tell the CEO that she wasn't sure, that she wasn't ready, that maybe it was all too much. But then, the CEO's calm, steady voice interrupted her thoughts. "I see the hesitation in your eyes," she said, her tone gentle but firm, as if she had anticipated this moment, as if she understood the weight of the decision the mother was facing. "And I understand it. This kind of change is scary. It's natural to feel overwhelmed. But let me tell you this: you are more than capable. You have been fighting for your family, for your future, for years. You've already proven that you can handle so much more than you think. This opportunity isn't just about the job, it's about what you're capable of, what you can give not only to others but to yourself." The mother's eyes lifted to meet the CEO's, a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, or the beginnings of belief shining through the cloud of doubt. The CEO continued, her words thoughtful, measured, as though speaking not just to her, but to the very core of her insecurities. "You've spent so long caring for others, making sure everyone else is okay, that you may have forgotten how much you have to offer. You have strength, resilience, and a heart that's always been ready to do the hard work. What I'm offering you is a chance to invest in yourself, to show the world and yourself just how capable you are. And I'll be here to help you along the way. I won't just be a boss, I'll be a mentor. I've walked this path, and I know how it feels to doubt yourself, to question if you deserve something better. But trust me, you do." The CEO's words landed like a bomb on the mother's raw, uncertain heart. She had always put everyone else first, always carried the weight of her responsibilities alone, but this was different. This wasn't just about the job or the money, it was about giving herself permission to dream, to step into a future where she wasn't just a mother, a caretaker, or a worker, but someone who was worthy of opportunities, someone who could embrace growth and change without apology. The CEO leaned forward, her gaze unwavering, offering a steady hand across the table. "You don't have to make a decision today. Take your time. But know that I believe in you. And I'm here to help you make this transition, no matter how difficult it might seem." The mother's heart swelled with emotion as the weight of the moment settled over her. She had been living for so long in the shadows of self-doubt, unsure if she was deserving of anything more than the life she had always known. But here, in this room, across from a woman who had made her own path to success, she was being offered a chance to step into something bigger, something she never thought possible. It wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline, an invitation to rediscover herself, to carve out a new space for her own dreams. She could feel the hesitation beginning to loosen its grip on her, replaced by a flicker of excitement, a sense of possibility that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Maybe I do deserve this," she thought. "Maybe it's time to believe in myself the way others believe in me." With a shaky but determined breath, she nodded slowly, her voice a whisper, yet strong with newfound resolve. "Okay," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'll do it. I'll take the chance." And in that moment, the mother knew that whatever came next, she was no longer bound by the fears that had held her back for so long. She had just taken the first step toward a future she never thought possible, a future where she would no longer hesitate to claim the life she deserved. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft rays across the small kitchen, where the mother stood, her hands trembling slightly as she poured cereal into her son's bowl. It was a moment like any other, a quiet routine she had come to rely on. But today was different. Today, the decision that had been hanging in the air for weeks, a decision that felt as heavy as the world itself, was about to take root. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a reminder of the call she had received the day before, the one that had set everything in motion. The CEO of the company, a woman whose reputation for strength and vision had inspired many, had reached out with an offer. An opportunity. A chance to step into a new role, one that would challenge her, push her out of the comfort zone she had clung to, and force her to confront her fears head on. It was a leap, one she wasn't sure she was ready to take. She had spent so many years putting her son first, carving out a life that was safe, stable, and predictable. But now, this offer, this chance to change the course of her life, loomed in front of her like a door she wasn't sure she could open. Could she really do this? Could she, a single mother who had been on the margins for so long, take a chance on herself? The uncertainty wrapped around her like a fog, but as she watched her son, his bright eyes full of hope and innocence, the fear began to dissolve, replaced by a slow-burning determination. This was not just about her anymore. This was about him, their future, the life she wanted to give him, the opportunities she had always dreamed of but never had the courage to chase. The decision was bigger than business. It was about securing a future where her son wouldn't have to struggle the way she had, where he could see his mother not just as a provider, but as a woman who had the strength to rise, to change, to thrive. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the worn edge of the phone as she dialed the CEO's number, the weight of the moment hanging in the balance. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "I'm ready to take the plunge." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the CEO's voice, warm and affirming, spoke, "I knew you would be. This is your moment. Don't look back." The words resonated in her chest, stirring something deep within her, a sense of purpose, of possibility. As she hung up the phone, the gravity of her decision began to settle in, but this time, it was not the weight of doubt that pressed on her shoulders. It was the weight of ambition, of hope. She could feel it in the way her pulse quickened, in the way her breath came a little easier. She was no longer just the woman who cleaned the office, who did her best to make ends meet. She was stepping into a new chapter, a chapter where she would take control, where she would carve a space for herself in a world that often seemed to ignore her. Over the next few days, she prepared herself for the shift that was coming. She began to transform her mind and her approach, reading books on leadership, seeking out mentors, and practicing new skills. There were moments of doubt, of course, moments when the old fears whispered in her ear, telling her she wasn't enough, that she wasn't worthy of the opportunity she had been given. But each time, she thought of her son, the way he looked at her with complete trust, the way his small hand fit perfectly into hers, and she pushed the doubts aside. This wasn't just for her anymore. It was for him, for the life they could have together, for the future she wanted to build. The first day at the company was overwhelming, to say the least. The office buzzed with energy, the people were warm but curious, and she found herself out of her depth in a world that felt as foreign as the moon. Yet, as the day went on, she began to find her footing. The work was challenging, but it was also exhilarating. She had ideas to offer, perspectives to share, and slowly, she realized that the role she had stepped into wasn't just a job, it was a calling. She began to see herself not as an outsider, but as someone who brought value, who brought a fresh perspective to a company that had become stagnant in its old ways. And with each passing day, the quiet doubts that had once clouded her confidence started to melt away, replaced by a deep, unwavering belief in her ability to succeed. She wasn't just proving herself to the company, she was proving herself to her son and to the woman she was becoming. As weeks passed, the transformation was undeniable. She moved with a sense of purpose, her voice growing stronger in meetings, her ideas being listened to, and her presence felt. The mother who had once been afraid to take risks was now the woman leading with conviction, not just for herself, but for her family's future. The decision to take that leap, to step into the unknown, was the hardest choice she had ever made. But it was also the best. She had stepped into a new chapter of her life, a chapter filled with opportunity, strength, and the unwavering belief that she was capable of creating the life she had always dreamed of. And as she looked at her son that night, the pride in his eyes told her everything she needed to know: she had made the right choice. After years of struggling to make ends meet, Clara stood at the precipice of a new chapter, her heart heavy with both excitement and uncertainty. As a single mother, she had spent the better part of her life putting her child's needs first, sacrificing her own dreams for the comfort and safety of her little one. But deep down, she knew that in order to build a better future for them both, she had to step into the world she had always been afraid to enter, the business world. When the opportunity arose to work alongside Emily, a successful CEO known for her innovative leadership and sharp business acumen, Clara felt a mixture of awe and self-doubt. How could someone like her, someone who had never received formal business training, someone whose world had always revolved around survival, possibly thrive in a field dominated by the confident and well-connected? Yet, the decision to join Emily's company was not just about taking a job, it was about crafting a legacy for her child, one that would be rooted in perseverance, resilience, and hope. She knew she had to prove to herself and her child that success was not something determined by circumstances, but by the strength to rise above them. Clara's first days at the company were filled with a sense of disbelief and wonder. She was surrounded by sharp minds, fast-paced decisions, and a world that seemed both intimidating and exhilarating. Emily, however, took Clara under her wing with the quiet confidence of a mentor who saw potential in her that Clara hadn't yet recognized in herself. Emily's leadership style was unorthodox but inspiring. She didn't just manage people, she developed them, pushing them to challenge their assumptions, take risks, and embrace failure as a part of the learning process. Clara soaked up every lesson, every piece of advice, and despite her initial fears, she began to find her voice in the business world. She learned to navigate meetings with confidence, to speak up even when she doubted her own ideas, and to understand the intricate dance between strategy, creativity, and empathy. Slowly but surely, Clara began to realize that she wasn't just growing professionally, she was evolving as a person. She discovered parts of herself she had long buried under the weight of responsibilities: her intelligence, her creativity, her ability to connect with others, and she started to nurture those qualities with the same care she had once given to her child. But even as Clara embraced this new world, the driving force behind her journey remained unwavering: her child. Every early morning, every late night spent poring over reports or making calls, was not just for the success of the company, but for the future she wanted to build. Clara dreamt of showing her child that hard work, determination, and self-belief could transform any situation, no matter how humble its beginnings. She wanted her child to see that success was not about privilege or connections, but about resilience and the willingness to learn and grow. With each new skill she mastered, whether it was understanding market trends, negotiating deals, or building lasting relationships with clients, Clara felt herself moving closer to her goal. But the journey was not without its challenges. There were moments when the weight of both work and motherhood seemed unbearable, when Clara questioned whether she could keep going. She missed her child during long hours at the office, and there were times when she felt she was falling short as both a mother and an employee. But Emily's guidance reminded her that balance didn't come in perfection, but in progress. "It's okay to stumble," Emily would tell her, "what matters is that you stand up again." And stand up Clara did. Each day, as she moved forward in her career, she took a step closer to the future she had always envisioned, one where she could provide for her child, yes, but also one where her child would see her mother not just as a caretaker, but as a role model, as a woman who was capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. The skills Clara acquired were not just professional tools, they were the building blocks of a legacy, one that showed her child that dreams, no matter how distant, could be turned into reality with perseverance and heart. Clara's transformation was gradual, but undeniable. She began to make decisions with confidence, to influence others with her ideas, and, most importantly, to mentor those who once doubted her abilities. She no longer saw herself as an outsider in the business world, but as someone who belonged, someone who had earned her place through hard work and a relentless pursuit of growth. As Clara's success grew, so did her sense of purpose. She knew her journey wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder, it was about proving that anyone, regardless of their past, could rise to greatness. With each step forward, she was not just shaping her own future, but the future of the next generation, a future that her child would one day inherit. Clara's journey was one of rediscovery, of finding strength in places she had long forgotten, and it was a testament to the power of new beginnings, proving that no matter where you start, it's never too late to create a life that reflects the values you hold most dear. From the outside, it was hard to see the transformation, but within, everything had changed. Sarah, once a single mother struggling to make ends meet, had defied every expectation and overcome unimaginable obstacles to build a life of success and empowerment. It hadn't been easy. She had battled with self-doubt, faced the harsh realities of balancing motherhood and work, and wrestled with the scars of her past. But through it all, Sarah had developed a quiet resilience, a strength that no one, not even she, had known existed within her. She had always been driven, always believed in the power of hard work, but it wasn't until she found herself standing in front of a room of powerful executives that she truly understood her worth. It was in that moment, standing beside the CEO, who had once been her colleague and now had become her mentor, that Sarah realized just how far she had come. Their relationship had evolved over time, shifting from mere professional acquaintances to something much deeper. The CEO, having recognized Sarah's potential early on, had taken her under her wing, offering guidance and wisdom that would prove invaluable. At first, Sarah had hesitated. Imposter syndrome clung to her like a shadow, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't worthy of the opportunities being handed to her. But the CEO had believed in her even when Sarah couldn't believe in herself. And through their countless hours of mentorship, Sarah began to shed the remnants of her self-doubt. She learned that her past struggles didn't define her, rather, they had shaped her into someone who was capable of achieving great things. As Sarah's confidence grew, so did her business acumen. She learned the art of negotiation, of setting boundaries, of owning her space in rooms where she once felt small. She learned how to build relationships, how to lead with both heart and mind, and how to be unapologetically ambitious. But most importantly, Sarah learned to trust herself, to trust the woman she was becoming. The woman who had once feared failure now stepped into her power with a quiet determination that commanded respect. Her business flourished. Sarah's company, which had started as a small venture in her garage, became a beacon of innovation and empowerment, attracting clients and collaborators who admired her vision and tenacity. And as her success grew, so did her sense of purpose. She wasn't just building a company, she was building a legacy. A legacy that showed other women, especially those who had been knocked down by life's challenges, that they too could rise, that they too had the strength to turn their dreams into reality. Her transformation wasn't just personal, it was contagious. She became a mentor to others, much like the CEO had once been to her. Women who had struggled with the same fears and uncertainties, women who had been overlooked or underestimated, sought her guidance. And Sarah gave it freely, passing on the lessons she had learned through blood, sweat, and tears. She shared her journey, not just the triumphs, but the setbacks, the failures, and the hard-won victories. She made sure those who came after her knew that success was never a straight line, but a winding path filled with lessons at every turn. The relationship between Sarah and the CEO had come full circle. What had once been a professional dynamic rooted in mentorship had blossomed into a deep friendship and mutual respect. They now stood side by side, not as mentor and mentee, but as equals, two women who had fought their way to the top, who had each carved their own path, and who knew the value of lifting others as they climbed. Sarah had come to understand that her journey wasn't just about achieving success for herself, it was about creating space for others to thrive. Her empowerment wasn't just about personal gain, it was about inspiring change, creating opportunities, and breaking down the barriers that had once held her and countless others back. Looking back on everything she had accomplished, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. From a place of uncertainty and struggle, she had risen, defying the odds and proving that no dream was too big, no challenge insurmountable. She wasn't just a businesswoman now, she was a symbol of resilience, of the power of second chances, and of the incredible things that happen when you believe in yourself. And as she stood beside her mentor, the woman who had helped her see her own potential, Sarah knew that the journey was far from over. The world was still full of challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that with determination, integrity, and the courage to keep moving forward, she could achieve anything she set her mind to. Her legacy, one of empowerment and change, would continue to inspire others for generations to come, showing them that no matter where you start, it's never too late to change your life and become the person you were always meant to be.